Hi, if you're looking for a movie that will emotionally wreck you for 2 to 3 business days, then look no further than Past Lives. Hi, my name is Nick, and I've watched Past Lives twice in the last 5 days, and it has quickly become one of my favorite movies from 2023. This movie is the directorial debut for Celine Song, and she absolutely knocked it out of the park with this one. There's really only three actors in this whole movie, which is kind of crazy, but it also is kind of delightful in that way. The first one is Nora, who is played by Greta Lee. Next is Haesung, who's played by Taeyu. And lastly, Arthur, who's played by John Magaro. All three of them are absolutely fantastic in this film. I loved all their performances. In fact, I think Greta Lee got snubbed for Best Actress. She was so good. But this movie is about two kids who grew up together in Korea, and then one of them immigrated to Canada and then to New York City. And now, like 24 years later, they're reconnecting in New York for the first time. And the main lead, Nora, she is now married to her husband, Arthur. And they met when she was at an artist residency in Montauk. So they have really similar interests, and they seem like they're for each other. But then all of a sudden, this childhood person comes back into her life. For me, I think the best part about this movie is just how slow and intentional everything feels. From the scenes of the past to the shots that are of the two kids interacting. I love the colors between them. In one of the final scenes that the kids have before Nora immigrates, she is wearing yellow and Haesung is wearing dark blue. And so when they reconnect all these years later, those are the colors that they're wearing in the park. It really is a beautiful movie, and there's so many scenes that I think are so impactful for me that just resonate with me and just have me sit with them. And I really, really enjoyed this movie. And now I'm going to get really into the spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie and you don't want it to be ruined, then you can click away here. But for everybody else, okay, let's dive in. So I actually think that the hardest scenes for me in this movie come in the middle period, in the middle 12 years before the events, the current events, because it sort of reminds me of a past relationship in myself, and that is you are you finally reconnect with somebody and you get along really well. You think oh, this is my person, but it just feels like the wrong time. Everything feels like the wrong time, and that's just what keeps happening between Haesung and Nora. They keep talking about how they want to grow and be these the people that they want to be, but that doesn't require them to be in the same location. Every single time, it's Haesung wants to learn Chinese, so he's gonna go to China and he's gonna go pursue his dreams, and he meets somebody there just in a one-off chance, and they get together. And Nora, she doesn't want to go back to Seoul. She's trying to figure out who she is, so she goes to Montauk on an artist residency, and that's where she meets Arthur. They connect, and Arthur's just her person. They have very similar interests at the time that they meet. They just really do connect very well. And for me, that kind of reminds me of just something that happened in my life where, I'm kind of in that middle period of where they were. So it was for me, breaking up with my partner, it was very similar. She decided that she wanted to go somewhere else, and I kind of want to stay here where I am. And this is kind of that. And that's just what it is. And then, you meet people afterwards, and if it works, it works, or if it doesn't, it doesn't. But it's really hard because you kind of are in this middle stage of your life where you're ready to start doing something, but every time Haesung and Nora are thinking about getting together, something just stops them. They're past divert in every single way, and it's just really difficult. I also think that it's entirely mean to recommend somebody who you're in this sort of pseudo long distance relationship with, to recommend them to watch Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. That just feels mean. I don't know why. It just feels mean though. But I also think it's really devastating in the end of the 12-year period when Nora finally is just we have to stop talking because my life is on hold because of you. And so that's really difficult to say to somebody and really difficult to mean, but it's kind of what you needed to grow as a person and what she really needed. And that's what's so hard, is because no one's in the wrong. I think Haesung and Nora always say they're sorry, but then they're what are we sorry for? Nothing really. But I think Nora, when she does that, and then Haesung gets really upset, he's kind of just jokingly we aren't even dating. But to me, it almost feels like they were. Just because it didn't seem in the film that they weren't talking to anybody else. They were just talking to each other. That was sort of one thing. I mean, they didn't have the intimacy, obviously, but they seemed like very emotionally connected. And I think that's why it's so difficult. And maybe that's why it's so hard for them. It's because it wasn't like a big fight. It's just that their lives are going in different directions. I think after this point and when this like last third of the film kind of gets going is when Celine Song should have been nominated for Best Director, because it's just so beautiful. All the shots that she has of New York in the present day are just so amazing and gorgeous. There's also like what I love is that like as Haesung and Nora are walking, you know, it like zooms out and then they kind of like walk into frame and they're slowly there, and they get there finally. And when they get to the merry-go-round after that point, when they're kind of like leaving the dock area, you can just see that there's like only couples around them, and I think that's so like interesting of a shot. It makes the background so much more lively, and it can kind of like you get to this point where you see them kind of like talking a little bit more like it's a will they won't they type of thing. But then Nora starts talking about her husband a lot, and it's just really interesting. I absolutely loved it though. I also find the scenes with Arthur and Nora after Haesung and Nora hang out all day to be really interesting too, because it's kind of like Arthur is like letting his insecurities kind of win, and that he is like kind of portraying himself as like this evil white guy who is preventing Nora from being with her person. But I think Nora does a really good job here of explaining herself as like they are friends mostly, but like the past is the past. Like she is not the person that Haesung is like making her out to be, and Nora is like Haesung, the person who like in current day is a good match for Nora. I think there's a lot of like good conversations here when Arthur is asking Nora like if she thinks that Haesung is attractive or anything like that, and she's kind of like, I mean, he's just Korean and she misses home, and so that's what he reminds her of. And I just think it's like really interesting too how Arthur brings up the story dynamics of, you know, like how he was the one who like in most written scenarios is going to be the one who gets like that Nora is going to be the one who runs away from him. But I think Nora makes a really good point, which is that they never really were truly dating, and nor does Haesung really remind her of someone that Nora, would want to be with. I also think it's funny and interesting that they're both using stories as dynamics because, you know, they're both writers. I think there's a really interesting dichotomy between like the story that Arthur is kind of making up and the story that of Nora's reality, because like Arthur says it's like Nora makes her life so much bigger and better, and she is like telling him like, you make mine bigger and better too, but he's having some difficulties kind of like rationalizing it. I think it's just his own insecurities and how he doesn't know her language, and so that can kind of blend into like him not really understanding her. But I think she, in her current like age, is really understood by Arthur, and I think they're a really good pair together. I just think it's hard because you have this like the fairy tale story like surrounding you, and it's hard for you to really like. It's hard for it to culminate in anything that doesn't seem like it's going to go against you. But I really like how Nora just reassures Arthur over and over, and she tells him, like, this is where I need to be. I love the cinematography during the bar scenes, especially. I just love it how, you know, the initial shot is with the three of them. It's with Haesung, then Nora, and then Arthur. But as the conversation goes on, it's just between Haesung and Nora because they're speaking Korean, and Arthur has no idea what's going on. I mean, at the start, Nora is trying to, you know, kind of connect with him, and even Haesung is too. But, you know, as time progresses, it just gets harder and harder for her to keep translating back and forth, back and forth. And I know this is part of the reason that Arthur really wanted to learn Korean or wants to learn Korean, and also that he wants to understand Nora more fully, even when she's dreaming, which I think is really sweet. But I think this is like kind of like the current reality, which is that, you know, there's parts of her that he doesn't really understand. And I really like the dialogue between Nora and Haesung as, like, in the bar when they're kind of talking openly just about, or Haesung is kind of saying that, like, you know, they could have, like, what if, you know, she had stayed? What if they had, you know, connected 12 years ago? Like, where would they be? Would they have kids together and all of that? And she kind of makes a really good point, which is obviously that he is still interested in the kid version of Nora. Like, that's who he remembers, is like this idealistic version of herself that he holds on to, but that she doesn't. Like, she is a whole new and different person nowadays, and that's just how it is. And my favorite two scenes are just at the end when Hae-sung is waiting for his Uber and he's just sitting next to Nora, and then he kind of like yells at her like, "Hey," and it like flashes back to like when they were kids at the beginning, except it's nighttime, and he's just kind of saying like, for the Inyan, like, what are we? And she is kind of open, and she says like, it could have been all sorts of things. Like, we could have been connected as we had this like tumultuous time, like we were stuck together, that we thought we were going to be together, and then we just ended up hating each other. And he's kind of like, yeah, maybe we had like an impossible affair or something. And I just thought that was like really interesting. But what really stuck with me is when when Hae-sung is leaving, he kind of tells Nora, he's like, "Hey, do you think this is the past life? Because if it is a past life and we get together in the next one, I'll see you then." And I was like, oh my gosh. I thought that was so devastating and beautiful. Ugh. And then Nora walks back, and Arthur is sitting on the steps waiting for her. And I just think it's like such a lovely shot where she like comes up to him. I mean, I think he's just letting his own mind wander, but she comes back to him, and then when she breaks down, I think everybody, including me, breaks down too. It's so like touching, but it's so hard. And I think Arthur says it best when he's like, "I never thought I'd be in a situation like this." Yeah, I don't think anyone really wants to be there, but I just thought it was a perfect way to end the movie. It's also one of those scenes too, like when it's happening, you don't feel that bad, but the second the film is over, you're just like, ugh. It just feels like you've been gut punched, and that's what I really, really enjoyed about this movie. I think it's so beautiful and just so touching. But yeah, anyways, I give this film a 5 out of 5, and I will see you next week. Bye.